A storm was raging that night in the Colorado mountains, and the world seemed determined to drown out every sound of hope. But through the sheets of rain, a whisper broke through, trembling, fragile, almost too soft to be heard. "Please, my chest hurts so much." On a forgotten roadside bench sat a little girl, soaked, shivering, on the edge of collapse. And in that moment, a man who had spent his life chasing power and perfection, an untouchable millionaire CEO, stopped. He knelt beside her, unaware that this single choice would alter not only her future, but his own forever. What happens when the walls of wealth and success crash against the raw plea of a child who just wants to be seen, to be held, to be saved? Stay with us, because this story will touch every corner of your heart. And if it does, please subscribe to Loss and Healing. The mountains of Colorado were drenched in rain, the kind of storm that seemed determined to erase everything in its path. Wind bent the tall pines until their trunks groaned, and sheets of water rolled down the winding asphalt like rivers looking for escape. On that road, Ethan Marshall drove alone, his hands steady on the wheel of a sleek black electric car that hummed with a perfection that matched his carefully curated life. Inside the cabin, silence ruled, broken only by the rhythmic sweep of the wipers. Outside was chaos. Inside was control. That contrast defined him. He stole a glance in the mirror, not to watch the road, but to face the stranger he had become. The reflection staring back at him was not the young visionary once praised for reshaping the future of clean energy. It was a man with hollow eyes, a shell built of steel and glass, a body dressed in expensive fabric but stripped of meaning. Years of leadership at Meridian Renewables had given him accolades, fortune, and influence, but had stolen from him the ability to feel. He whispered to no one, "A perfect life with nothing left to feel," and the truth in that sentence unsettled him. Rain thickened, smearing the windshield, forcing him to slow. As the headlights sliced through fog, something unusual appeared in the Shadosa bench. Weathered, forgotten, absurdly out of place on a mountain road where no one should sit at night. At first, he nearly dismissed it as an illusion carved by the storm. But then, the headlights revealed a small figure. The shape was unmistakable. A child hunched forward, soaked to the bone, hair plastered against her cheeks, her tiny frame trembling violently, one hand pressed against her chest as if she were trying to hold herself together. For a split second, annoyance flickered through him. What kind of parent left a little girl out here? He could just keep driving. It was not his responsibility. That phrase had guided much of his life. But then he heard it. Not thunder, not the roar of water. Something fragile, human, gasping, a sound so raw that it pierced the insulated silence of his car, and then a whisper, so faint he almost doubted it. "Please, my chest hurts so much." Ethan's heart lurched. Without conscious thought, he braked hard, swung the car to the side, and stepped into the storm. Rain lashed his face, soaking his coat instantly. He moved toward the bench, the sound guiding him more than his eyes. There she was, a girl no older than 7, her lips blue, her body convulsing in weak coughs. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, then closed again, as though even that effort was too much. He knelt, his voice trembling despite himself. Hey, look at me, can you breathe?" She tried to nod, but the attempt only produced a ragged cough. Panic surged in his chest. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her frail body, horrified at how light she felt when he lifted her. She was a bundle of bones and cold skin. Carrying her to the car, he whispered words he had not used in years, words he did not even know he remembered. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Please." His voice cracked, the sound startling him as much as the storm. Inside the car, warmth blasted from the vents, fogging the windows instantly. He laid her gently on the passenger seat, buckled her in as carefully as if she were glass, and then pushed the accelerator like a man being chased. The GPS told him the nearest emergency clinic was 12 minutes away. 12 minutes felt like 12 lifetimes. He kept glancing at her, each second terrified she might stop breathing. Her small hand slipped free of the coat and landed on the console, pale and trembling. He wanted to reach for it, but kept both hands on the wheel. His chest burned with emotions he could not name. For years, he had sat in rooms with men who moved markets with their signatures. He had argued over billions, commanded entire industries. Yet nothing had made him feel the way this moment did. a race against time with a fragile life in his care. When he screeched to a stop in front of Aspen Valley Emergency, he did not think about appearances. He scooped her into his arms, soaked and desperate, and burst through the sliding doors shouting for help. Nurses rushed to meet him, followed by a doctor whose calm eyes hid urgency. Dr. Rachel Myers introduced herself as she directed her team. Within seconds, the girl was on a table, oxygen mask pressed to her face, vitals read aloud in clipped tones. "What happened?" the doctor asked. I found her," Ethan stammered. "On the road." She said her chest hurt. She was alone. His words felt thin, insufficient against the sight of the little girl trembling on the hospital bed. The doctor's voice was steady but tight. "Looks like pneumonia, possibly hypothermia. We need labs." She did not waste time on more questions. Machines beeped, nurses scribbled, commands filled the room. Ethan stepped back, water dripping from his sleeves, hands trembling. Then something happened. The girl, barely conscious, reached blindly into the air. Her small fingers brushed against the fabric of his sleeve and held on, weak but unrelenting. Her lips moved beneath the mask, whispering two words that tore through him. "Don't leave." In that moment, Ethan felt something inside him fracture and open. He did not know her name, her story, or why fate had placed her on that bench. But one thing crystallized within him with absolute certainty. He was not going anywhere. The storm outside raged on, but within the sterile light of that clinic, another kind of storm began, the breaking of a man who had once believed he had nothing left to feel. The fluorescent light in the clinic flickered slightly as Ethan sat outside the ER room, elbows on his knees, clothes still damp from the storm. He could not shake the sound of that whisper. "Please, my chest hurts so much." It echoed in his mind, louder than the storm had ever been. For the first time in years, his calendar, his empire's endless demands all faded into background noise. What mattered was a fragile life on the other side of the door. Dr. Rachel Myers stepped out briefly, wiping her hands on a towel.
Rest now.
"She is stable for now," she said with calm assurance. "We are starting antibiotics. Chest x-rays suggest pneumonia, but we caught it early.
Your blood pressure
She is very
normal.
cold and very weak, but she has a chance." Ethan nodded but did not move. He could see her tiny frame through the frosted glass, dwarfed by machines and tubing. Every instinct told him he should leave, that he had done enough by bringing her here. But his body resisted. Something deeper than reason told him to stay. When the nurse came by with paperwork, she asked, "Are you family?" He hesitated. "No," he admitted, though the word felt like a lie. She studied him for a moment, then nodded gently. "You can stay for now. Sometimes presence helps." Hours passed. The storm outside gave way to a heavy mist. Aspen Valley was quiet, its streets nearly deserted, the mountains
It is
cloaked
going to
like
be all right.
sentinels in fog. Ethan ignored his buzzing phone, the alerts piling in. Board meeting missed, investors furious, headlines speculating. None of it mattered. His gaze stayed fixed on the silhouette of the child who clung to life. When Rachel returned later that night, her expression carried a shadow. "I ran more tests," she explained. "Her white blood cell count is unusually high. There are signs of chemical exposure, possibly chronic." Ethan frowned, tension rising in his chest. "Chemical exposure? From where?" She hesitated. "Years ago, I saw something similar in children living near an old industrial site, but we need more data before I say anything conclusive." Her voice softened. "You brought her here in time. That may have saved her." But Ethan could not stop thinking about the mark he had seen on the girl's wrist earlier. Faint but real. He remembered the way her lips had turned blue, the way her lungs fought against invisible weight. He pressed his palms together, restless. The next morning, he was still in the chair when the nurse told him the girl had finally spoken her name, Laya. Short, delicate, like a note of music almost too soft for the ear. Later that day, Rachel approached him again with something in her hand. A small Ziploc bag containing a folded envelope, worn and stained. "We found this in her backpack," she said. Ethan opened it carefully. The paper inside carried an address scrawled in uneven handwriting. No name, no explanation.
The little girl is stable
Just
for
a
now.
trailer number in a place called Maple Ridge, 15 minutes away. Ethan stared at it, jaw tightening. Without hesitation, he said, "I will go." The drive was quiet, but the silence pressed heavier than the storm had. He passed through narrow roads, lined with broken fences and sagging
Are you
wires,
family?
until he reached a sign so
Are you
rusted
family?
it barely spoke. Whispering Pines, a trailer park that looked abandoned by time itself. The homes leaned at odd angles, aluminum walls streaked with grime, windows broken and patched with plastic. The air smelled of mildew and something harsher, metallic, sour. At Lot 14, where the address pointed, he found a door slightly ajar. He knocked. No answer. The wind carried only the creak of metal and the faint drip of water from a broken gutter. Steeling himself, he pushed the door open. Inside, the trailer was a portrait of despair. A mattress lay bare on the floor, stained and thin. Cans were scattered across a counter. Mice droppings lined the baseboards. The heater blinked faintly, useless against the cold. In the corner, a doll slumped against the wall, missing one eye, its yarn hair tangled, its dress once pink now gray with dirt. Ethan froze. On the doll's foot, written faintly in marker, was a child's name, Laya. He picked it up, his throat tightening. On a small table nearby sat a cracked photograph. A young woman with auburn hair smiled while holding a little girl who could not have been more than 4. Their joy radiated from the faded image, though the woman's eyes carried a wary sharpness, the kind born of knowing storms too well. There was no sign of her now, no suitcase, no note, just absence. Near the heater, Ethan spotted something wedged underneath. A notebook, its cover warped from water damage. He pulled it free, flipping through frantic handwriting, dates, symptoms, headaches, nosebleeds, notes about water samples from the sink. Again and again, one phrase repeated in shaky letters, "It's the water." At the back, a crude hand-drawn map circled a section near the creek behind the trailers. The words were scrawled in desperate strokes. Westbrook discharge suspected. Do not drink. Do not let Laya near it. Ethan stood frozen, the notebook heavy in his hands. Then a voice startled him. You looking for that woman? He spun to see an older man standing just outside, a cigarette dangling from his lips. Denim jacket torn, face sunburned and tired. A pickup truck idled behind him. She don't live here anymore, the man muttered. Vanished one night. No goodbye, no police, nothing. What was her name? Ethan asked. Sarah, the man shrugged. Quiet, smart. Ask too many questions about the water, about the mill. Folks stopped talking to her. Then she was gone. Ethan felt a cold certainty form in his gut. This was not coincidence. He left the trailer with the photograph, the notebook, and the doll, placing them gently on the passenger seat beside him. The drive back was a blur, the mist thick, the road endless. When he returned to the clinic, Laya was awake, her voice faint but sure. You came back, she whispered. He knelt beside her bed and placed the doll in her small hand. Her eyes widened, a tear sliding down her cheek as she hugged it to her chest. Ethan whispered, I found where you lived. I am going to find your mom, I promise. But even as he said the words, he knew he was not just promising her. He was making a vow to himself. Whatever poison had stolen this little girl's health, whatever silence had left her in the rain, it would not stay hidden. Not anymore. The storm had passed, but the weight inside Ethan's chest only grew heavier. His phone would not stop buzzing calls from the board, urgent texts from investors, notifications stacked one after another. For years, those alerts had dictated his every move. But tonight, he did not even glance. Instead, his eyes stayed fixed on the small hospital bed where Laya lay, her breathing shallow but steadier than the night before. When Rachel stepped into the hallway, she carried more test results in her hands. She spoke carefully, each word measured. The toxins in her blood point to long-term exposure. Lead, benzene, arsenic. These are not from spoiled food or poor hygiene. They are industrial, waterborne. She lowered her voice. I think this girl has been poisoned slowly for years. Ethan leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling as if it might offer answers. Images of the trailer flashed through his mind, the broken heater, the notebook filled with desperate warnings, the map circled in red. He remembered the man's words. Sarah asked too many questions, then vanished. It was no longer just about pneumonia. It was about survival, about truth. His phone vibrated again. He answered this time reluctantly. On the other end was Leonard Green, the chairman of the board. Marshall, you have missed 3 calls.
You came back.
The media is circling, Westbrook's lawyers are calling, and our investors want answers. Are you aligning yourself with this mess? If you drag us into this contamination scandal, you are finished. Meridian is finished. You have until tonight to return to Denver, or we will consider your silence a resignation. The line went dead before Ethan could respond. He stared at the black screen, his reflection ghost-like on the glass. For years, he had lived for this world of power, money, and politics. But as he looked into Laya's room again, he felt something shift. The suitcases of his old life seemed hollow compared to the fragile hand that had clung to his sleeve in the storm. That evening, he sat by her bedside, bringing with him a fleece blanket and a small set of pajamas decorated with tiny stars. He unfolded them gently, offering them like treasures. "I thought you might like something softer than hospital sheets," he said. Laya's hands trembled as she touched the fabric. Her shoulders tightened, as if expecting punishment, as if bracing for a voice raised in anger. Ethan's heart clenched at the sight. He knelt beside her and whispered, "No one will hurt you here. You are safe." Slowly she nodded, allowing him to help her change. When he saw the bruises along her ribs, the marks of hardship, he said nothing, though the silence thundered inside him. Once she was wrapped in the new blanket, she leaned into its warmth. She did not look at him, but she did not pull away either. For Ethan, that trust, however small, was more valuable than any deal he had ever signed. He stayed long after she drifted to sleep, her tiny frame curled around the doll he had returned to her. At one point, she murmured words that nearly broke him. No one ever stayed before. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his voice low, almost trembling. "I am staying." The days that followed grew into a rhythm Ethan had never known. He no longer marked time by shareholder meetings or international flights, but by the rise and fall of Laya's temperature, the small ounces of food she managed to eat, the soft curve of her lips when she smiled instead of coughed. He began showing up each morning in simple clothes, no longer the polished armor of tailored suits. Nurses found him sitting cross-legged on the floor of Laya's room with crayons scattered around, or reading books in silly voices until she laughed. Her room transformed, its walls filling with drawings of suns, houses, stick figures holding hands. A nurse strung fairy lights above her bed, casting warm glows like fireflies. Slowly, her fear gave way to curiosity. She teased him gently about coloring too neatly, handing him a crayon and insisting he make mistakes. When he drew outside the lines, she giggled, her laughter soft but real. Ethan found himself treasuring each sound. One morning, he arrived to find a new drawing taped to the wall. 3 stick figures holding hands. One had long hair, one wore a dress, and the tallest had messy hair with a square body. At the center of his chest was a bright red heart, filled so hard with crayon that the paper had nearly torn. Ethan's breath caught. He looked at her, but she only shrugged, pretending it was nothing. Later that day, Rachel pulled him aside. Her eyes were kind but serious. "She is improving faster than I expected. Her appetite is returning, her fever is gone. But it is not only the medicine, she is healing because she feels safe. Children like her do not just get sick from exposure, they get sick from fear, from abandonment. She is not abandoned anymore." Ethan could barely answer. He returned to her room and sat quietly, watching her sleep beneath the blanket he had brought. When his phone buzzed again, flashing another urgent call, he ignored it. He had spent a lifetime building an empire of steel and numbers, but none of it had ever filled the emptiness he carried. This child, this fragile trust, was doing what billions never could. That night, when she stirred in her sleep, her small hand reached blindly toward the edge of the bed. Without hesitation, Ethan slipped his hand into hers. Her fingers curled around him even in dreams, holding him to a promise he had already made. He whispered softly, "Good dreams, kiddo. I am not going anywhere." For a man who once measured life by profits and legacy, Ethan Marshall discovered something deeper. He did not want to leave. He wanted to stay. And that choice, quiet but absolute, was the beginning of a transformation neither of them could have predicted. The winter sun poured through the hospital blinds in soft stripes, casting golden light across the room that had slowly transformed from sterile white into a sanctuary of color and warmth. Days had passed since Ethan first carried Laya out of the storm, and with each sunrise, her room became less like a ward and more like a small world she could call her own. Drawings covered the walls, stick figures and hearts and little houses scribbled in crayon, bright against the dull paint. A string of fairy lights blinked faintly above her bed, hung there by a kind nurse who had grown fond of her. Ethan was no longer the stranger who paced at the door. He was part of this rhythm now, arriving each morning with books or puzzles, or little gifts that made her eyes flicker with cautious wonder. He no longer wore pressed suits or polished shoes. Instead, he showed up in soft sweaters and sneakers, hair slightly unkempt, carrying crayons and children's stories like they were contracts more important than any he had ever signed. At first, Laia had been hesitant, speaking little, often bracing herself when he leaned too close, as though expecting to be scolded or struck. But slowly, she began to relax. Each laugh was a breakthrough, each glance a fragile thread of trust.
I am staying.
Ethan discovered patience he never knew he had, reading the same story again and again because she liked the way he stumbled over silly rhymes. When she handed him a crayon and told him he was coloring too carefully, he let himself scribble wildly just to hear her giggle. One afternoon, as the snow melted outside and the mountains glistened under pale sunlight, Ethan sat on the floor with Leia, a coloring book spread between them. She leaned close, tongue peeking from the corner of her mouth as she focused on coloring the sun above a small house. Then she looked up at him and said softly, "You don't have to stay inside the lines. It's prettier when it's messy." The words struck him more deeply than she could have known. For a man who had spent decades living within rigid lines profit margins, quarterly goals, public expectation, sure simple lesson felt like a revelation. He chuckled, took the bright orange crayon she handed him, and scribbled a crooked mustache on the picture's cat. Laia burst into laughter, her small hand covering her mouth, her eyes lighting up. Ethan felt something loosen inside his chest, something that had been bound for far too long. The next morning, he arrived early and found a new drawing taped to the wall above her bed. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands, one with long hair, one in a dress, and one taller with messy hair and square shoulders. At the center of the tall figure's chest was a bold red heart, colored in so firmly that the paper had torn. Ethan stood silently before it, his throat tightening. When Laia noticed him looking, she shrugged as if it meant nothing, but the silence between them said everything. Later that day, Rachel pulled him aside in the hallway. She was smiling as she scrolled through charts on her tablet. "She's improving faster than I expected. Her appetite is up. No fever for 2 days. She is stronger." Ethan felt relief wash over him like warm sunlight. But Rachel was not finished. "It's not just the medication," she added softly. "She's healing because she feels safe. Children like Leia don't just suffer from toxins or cold. They suffer from fear, from abandonment. She is no longer forgotten. That makes all the difference." Ethan swallowed hard, unable to speak. He thought of the countless nights he had sat alone in glass towers overlooking cities, believing himself powerful while feeling emptier than ever. Now, in this small room filled with crayon drawings and soft lights, he was beginning to understand what it meant to give life, not just preserve it. That evening, as Leia drifted into sleep, she whispered words that echoed in the quiet. No one ever stayed before. Ethan leaned closer, brushing hair from her forehead, his voice breaking as he answered, "I'm staying." He meant it with a depth he had never given to any boardroom vow or business promise. In the days that followed, her recovery became their shared journey. She began eating more, even laughing at times, her cheeks regaining color. Nurses remarked on the change not just in her, but in him. The man who had once measured success by numbers was now defined by small victorias, clear breath, a steady heartbeat, a child's smile. One night, when the clinic was hushed and only the faint beeping of machines filled the halls, Ethan sat by her bed as she dreamed. Her small hand reached out in her sleep, instinctively searching. Without hesitation, he took it, letting her fingers curl around his. It was a bond formed not by blood but by choice, stronger than any tie he had known. As dawn painted the mountains in shades of lavender and gold, Ethan realized the truth he had been avoiding. He no longer belonged to the world of quarterly reports and empty accolades. His place was here, beside this little girl who had taught him how to feel again. For the first time in decades, he did not wake with dread or emptiness. He woke with purpose. And it began with the simplest of decisions, not to leave. The winter air outside Aspen carried a sharp edge, the kind of cold that demanded honesty. Ethan stood at the window of his cabin, the mist curling through the pines like secrets too long buried. On the table behind him lay the results of the private tests he had ordered, pages filled with numbers that confirmed what his heart already knew. Lead, arsenic, benzene poisons carried in water, absorbed in silence, marking a child's body with invisible scars. The levels were not the result of an accident, but of years of neglect, of deliberate avoidance by those who should have cared. He gripped the folder so tightly that the paper crinkled. His knuckles turned white, his jaw locked. For so long, he had been part of a world that prided itself on solving global problems with sweeping solutions and grand investments. But here, in this small mountain town, a child had nearly died from something as simple as drinking from her own kitchen sink. No press release could fix that. No speech could undo it. His phone buzzed again. Leonard Green's voice, clipped and impatient, cut through the static. If you choose this fight, you take Meridian down with you. This is bigger than you. Do you understand what you are risking? Ethan listened without responding, his eyes still fixed on the glow of the clinic far below in the valley. When the call ended, he let the phone drop to the table, ignored. Inside that clinic, Laya lay under blankets, her chest rising more easily now, her lips regaining color. Ethan returned the next morning with a folded blanket and a small bag containing soft pajamas. She received them with hesitation at first, but when he helped her dress and tucked the new blanket around her, she leaned into the warmth. Her body was still thin, her ribs visible, her skin marked with small bruises, but her eyes carried something new trust. One evening, as she drifted towards sleep, her lips formed words that cut through him. No one ever stayed before. Ethan brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, I am staying. But outside their fragile sanctuary, pressure mounted. Anonymous messages arrived on his phone. Speak out and you lose everything. Stay quiet and she lives. Dark SUVs appeared at the edge of his driveway, engines idling before fading back into the night. Silence was no longer safety. Silence was a cage. Rachel confronted him with her findings, her voice steady though her eyes betrayed exhaustion. The toxins are not natural. They are industrial. The notebook you found proves that Sarah, Laya's mother, knew something. She tracked symptoms, collected water samples, even drew a map pointing to the discharge site. This is not just about one child. This is about an entire community. Ethan stood at the clinic window that night, staring at Laya's latest drawing taped beside her bed. 3 figures stood together, but this time there were dozens of smaller ones in the background, all watching. At the top, in bold red crayon, she had written 3 crooked words. Tell the truth. The message hit him harder than any boardroom ultimatum ever had. He realized that this fight was no longer optional. It was demanded of him, not by shareholders or investors, but by a child who had trusted him with her life. The next morning, he stood on the steps of the state capitol in Denver, the February wind biting against his skin. Reporters gathered, cameras pointed, microphones waiting. Beside him stood Rachel with her medical reports and Elise Mercer, the attorney who had agreed to represent them. Ethan clutched Laya's drawing in his pocket, the paper already softened by his grip. When he stepped to the podium, his voice trembled at first, but then grew steady. My name is Ethan Marshall. Until 3 weeks ago, I was the CEO of a clean energy firm valued at over $4 billion. I believed I was building a future to be proud of, but I was wrong. Because right here, in our own state, there is a company poisoning our people quietly, consistently, and criminally. Their name is Westbrook Industries. And I know the truth because I found one of their victims. He unfolded the drawing and held it up, his eyes burning. Her name is Laya. She is 7 years old. She was left on a roadside bench in the freezing rain, whispering that her chest hurt so much. She was dying not because of an accident, but because of what she drank, what she breathed, what no one wanted to face. And I am here today not as a CEO, but as someone who chose to stay. This is not just about one girl. It is about all of us. For a moment, silence blanketed the crowd. Then a voice called out, "He is right!" Another followed. Applause rippled, grew, became thunderous. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, people stood to cheer. Ethan felt the wave of it crash over him, but instead of fear, he felt relief. The truth was no longer buried. It was alive in the open air. When he stepped down from the podium, Elise touched his arm. Rachel nodded, pride clear in her eyes. And in the crowd, Ethan caught sight of a young girl clinging to her mother's coat, staring up at him with wide eyes, a drawing clutched in her hand. Another child. Another reminder of why he had done this.
Oh my God, that's
Back at the
hilarious.
courthouse days
You're
later,
kidding me.
Ethan signed the papers for emergency guardianship. Elise warned him of the responsibilities of care, courts, schools,
Your lungs
doctors.
sound clear.
But
Good
his answer
job,
was
little
simple.
one.
She is not a detour. She is my choice. The judge studied him, asking why he wanted custody of a child he had only just met. Ethan's voice was steady.
This might help
Because
with
she is
waiting
not my
time.
responsibility.
Oh, thank
She
you.
is my
That's so kind of
choice.
you.
I know what it feels like to be chosen.
Thank you again so much.
And I know what it does to a child
my
when no
pleasure.
one ever does. At that moment, the doors opened, and Laya ran into the courtroom clutching a drawing, throwing her arms around him. Her voice broke the silence.
You
I
are
want
all
to stay
healed
with
because you
him.
decided to
He
stay.
makes the bad dreams stop. The judge exhaled, nodded, and granted the motion. Ethan walked out of the courthouse that day, not as a CEO, not as a man defined by wealth, but as someone who had finally chosen the truth and chosen family. The townhouse on the edge of Aspen was small compared to the glass towers Ethan once inhabited, but it was alive with warmth in ways no skyscraper had ever been. Sunlight streamed through soft curtains, spilling across wooden floors and rugs chosen not for style but for comfort. There was a fireplace that Laya immediately called the Dragon's Mouth, and a spare bedroom she declared was her mother's room for when she returned. On the first day, she explored every corner as if it were a castle. She traced her fingers along the ridges of the walls, tested the bounce of the couch cushions,
No,
and
it's not gonna
rifled
fit
through
there.
the shelves
Are you
as though
sure?
each book were a hidden treasure. In the living room, Ethan had set up a small toy corner with a dollhouse, markers, and a beanbag. When she saw it, her smile spread so wide it nearly undid him. "Is this mine?" she asked. Ethan nodded. "All of it, for as long as you want." The next morning, she padded into the kitchen wearing pajamas that were still too big for her. She leaned against the counter, watching intently as Ethan fumbled with the espresso machine. "What does it do?" she asked, curiosity lighting her tired eyes. "It makes adults tolerable," he joked, and she giggled, a sound that filled the house more beautifully than any symphony. When she asked if she could try, he stepped aside. She pressed the button, watched the stream of amber liquid fill the cup, and announced proudly, "I am the morning barista. Your coffee is ready, sir." Moments like that stitched themselves into the fabric of their new life. Dr. Myers visited often, bringing vitamins, children's books, and her calm
You feel
presence.
like-
She remarked on the glow in Laya's cheeks, the way her laughter came easier, the strength in her voice. "She is different," Rachel said quietly one afternoon.
Sir, can you
Ethan
tell us what
nodded,
happened?
his eyes
We
soft.
need answers.
"So am I."
Just one statement,
Rachel
please.
placed a folder on the table, lab results showing improvement. Whatever damage was there, she is fighting it. You did not save her with money. You saved her by staying. In the weeks that followed, winter began to loosen its grip. Snow melted from sidewalks, giving way to patches of grass. Laya played in the small yard behind the townhouse, spinning in circles with her arms outstretched like wings. She wore the yellow sweater Ethan had found at a boutique, her cheeks flushed not from fever but from joy. The girl who had once whispered her pain on a roadside bench now danced in the sunlight like she had never known fear.
outside the
Inside,
lines
the
again.
home grew into a rhythm neither of them had expected. There were evenings spent with puzzles scattered across the floor, mornings with cocoa mugs left half full, afternoons with drawings taped to the walls until every surface bloomed with color. Ethan discovered that happiness was not found in boardrooms or private jets, but in the sound of a child's laughter echoing down a hallway. One day, Laya burst through the door from the yard, clutching a piece of paper flapping in her hands.
Are you ready
"I
for
made
this?
something,"
I'm ready.
she announced breathlessly. Ethan unfolded the drawing carefully. It showed three figures standing hand in hand him, Laya, and a third above them, drawn in golden and blue rays with the word Mom floating like a star. His chest tightened, but instead of pain, he felt something soften. Forgiveness maybe, or a peace he had not thought possible. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close. She whispered, "You feel like home." For Ethan, who had spent a lifetime chasing legacy, those words were more valuable than any empire. He realized that home was not a building of glass and steel. It was a heartbeat against his chest, a small voice calling him back. a child's hand reaching for his even in sleep.
too. This is great.
Life was not without challenges.
Excellent progress.
Reporters
and we
still
are
tried
so
to reach
proud of
him.
you.
Stories
thank
about
you.
Westbrook Industries filled headlines,
Look what
and his
I
former
drew.
colleagues painted him as reckless.
I
But
love
none of it mattered when he returned to the little townhouse and found Laya coloring at the table or singing off-key while building towers of mugs. Every choice he made now was anchored in something far stronger than ambition, love. As spring arrived fully, the scent of thawed earth filled the air. Leia's hair grew longer, curling at the ends, her face brighter each day. One evening, Ethan stood at the window with a mug of cocoa forgotten in his hand, watching her spin in the yard. Two toy cars sat on the porch, one old and cracked, the other new and shiny. She treated them both with equal care, past and present, side by side in peace. When she ran inside, cheeks pink, she climbed into his arms with a laugh that warmed the entire room. "I love you," he whispered into her hair. She smiled back, eyes shining. "You feel like home." And for the first time in years, Ethan Marshall was not searching for anything else. He had already found it. There are moments in life that do not ask politely
Good night,
for
kiddo.
our attention.
I am
They
here.
crash into us like storms, demanding we decide who we are and what we stand for. For Ethan, that moment came on a dark mountain road when a whisper broke through the rain. "Please, my chest hurts so much." It was the voice of a child, fragile and trembling, but strong enough to split open the walls of a man who had forgotten how to feel. What followed was not just a rescue, it was a rebirth. In staying with Leia, Ethan discovered that love is not built on duty, wealth, or appearance. It is built on presence. Staying meant holding her hand when nightmares returned, coloring outside the lines when laughter mattered more than perfection, and facing a world of silence and power with the courage to tell the truth. He lost the titles, the accolades, the towering image of success that once defined him, but in their place, he gained something far greater. The chance to choose family, the chance to stay when everyone else had left, the chance to become home for someone who desperately needed it. And in doing so, he found healing not only for her, but for himself. This story reminds us that sometimes the most powerful change begins with a single decision: to stop, to listen, to care. You do not need billions of dollars or a corporate empire to change a life. You need to be willing to stay, to hold on, to love, even when it costs you everything you thought you were. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that it is never too late to make a difference. Somewhere out there, someone is waiting for you to stay. And if you believe in stories that carry light through the darkest nights, we invite you to be part of our community. Subscribe to Loss and Healing, where we share journeys of hope, resilience, and the quiet power of love. Because in the end, healing does not come from running away. It comes from staying.